In the village of Capernaum, the air always smelled of salt and drying nets. The men here were as hard as the basalt rocks along the shore, and Ezra was the hardest of them all. He stood in the spray of the Galilean storms, staring with a face that seemed carved from stone. Every day he performed the same mechanical labor. He cast the nets, hauled the weight, and gutted the catch. He was a master of his trade, yet there was a mechanical coldness to his movements. He worked to survive, but the joy of the harvest had long since evaporated. The change happened years ago. His brother, Mattia, had waited until Ezra was asleep, broke into his home, and took every coin Ezra had saved over a lifetime of fishing. By sunrise, Mattia was gone. Mattia fled north to Damascus. He was hundreds of miles away, living in a city Ezra had never seen, completely shielded from the consequences of what he had done. While Mattia was starting over, Ezra was standing still. His muscles stayed strong, but his mind began to narrow around the betrayal. He spent his nights rehearsing the confrontation he would never have, sharpening his anger until it was the only thing he truly owned. This was the paradox of Ezra's life. He woke up every morning consumed by a rage meant for a man in another country. The anger didn't cost Mattia a single night's sleep, but it was slowly eroding Ezra's health and his ability to feel anything else. Ezra's anger was technically justified, but that didn't make it helpful. Over time, that sense of being right became a self-imposed prison. He was holding on to his pain as a matter of principle, unaware that the walls were closing in on him, not his brother. The village changed when Jesus of Nazareth arrived. The usual quiet of the docks was replaced by the noise of a growing crowd, pulling Ezra away from his solitary boat to see what the commotion was about. In the center of the crowd, a blind girl stood before the teacher. He touched her eyes, spoke a few words, and she suddenly blinks against the glare of the sun. She began to cry, not out of pain, but from the shock of seeing. Ezra watched from the back. For a second, he felt a surge of genuine warmth for the girl, a rare break in his emotional armor. But he caught himself, tightened his jaw, and forced the coldness back into his chest. He was finding that staying angry takes a lot of work. It requires a constant, conscious effort to push away moments of grace and ensure the heart remains locked tight. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, a child found Ezra by the water. The message was simple. The teacher wanted to speak with him by the shore. When Ezra arrived, Jesus didn't give him a lecture. He simply handed Ezra a heavy, jagged stone and told him to grip it as hard as he could. Ezra squeezed. The sharp edges of the stone bit into his palm. After a minute, his hand began to tremble. A sharp, burning ache moved from his knuckles up into his forearm. His muscles were screaming for him to stop, but he kept the grip tight. Then came the command, "Now, let it go." Ezra opened his hand. The stone hit the sand with a heavy thud. The relief was immediate. The blood flowed back into his fingers, and the throbbing in his arm began to fade. This physical act reveals the internal mechanics of a grudge. We often think of our anger as a weapon pointed at the person who hurt us. But as this model shows, the trajectory of that stress actually loops back, causing damage only to the person holding it. This is the illusion of control. We believe that by holding on to our resentment, we are somehow executing justice or keeping the offender in check. In reality, the offender is often entirely unaffected, while we are the ones enduring the constant strain of the grip. This perspective changes the goal of forgiveness. It isn't about the person who committed the wrong, or whether they deserve a clean slate. It is about the person who was hurt making a decision to drop the mechanism of their own pain. It is a choice you make entirely for yourself. It doesn't require an apology or a conversation with the other person. It is simply the moment you decide your own peace of mind is more important than your desire for revenge. 3 months passed. Life in Capernaum settled back into its rhythm. But Ezra was different. He had begun the slow, daily work of unlearning his bitterness, practicing the act of dropping the stone every time his thoughts turned to Damascus. Then a letter arrived. It was from his brother. Mattia was dying in a strange city, completely alone, with nothing to his name. He wasn't asking for money. He was only asking if his brother could ever forgive him. The old Ezra would have felt a surge of vindication. He would have viewed his brother's suffering as the payment he had been waiting for, and felt a grim satisfaction in the news. But as Ezra finished the letter, he found that the old, familiar clenching didn't happen. He stood up slowly. His shoulders were down, his jaw was relaxed, and for the first time in years, the silence in his house felt like actual peace rather than a tense standoff. He gathered a few things and stepped out of his door. He wasn't rushing toward Damascus out of a sense of obligation, but because he was finally light enough to make the trip. This walk was the physical evidence of his change. He wasn't just traveling to see a sick relative. He was moving through the world as a man who was no longer a prisoner of his own history. Mercy is often described as something we give to others, but it is ultimately the greatest gift we give to ourselves. Letting go of the weight you were never meant to carry is the only path to a quiet heart.